It doesn't begin with a dramatic collapse or the loud shattering of everything you've built. No, this moment begins quietly, like the gradual fading of daylight into dusk, so subtle and gentle that at first you barely notice the shift. But soon, it becomes unmistakable. It arrives in the spaces between your carefully rehearsed smiles, in the brief silences between your polite conversations, in the heavy pauses that stretch endlessly when you're alone, sipping your morning coffee or brushing your teeth in front of a mirror that seems no longer to reflect who you truly are. It's in those ordinary moments that something deep inside you quietly begins to stir, a voice that you might first dismiss as mere exhaustion or stress. But if you're truly honest, if you dare to listen closely, you recognize it as something else entirely. It's a quiet ache, a soft yet persistent grief, whispering a truth you've spent years trying to avoid. This isn't me. Have you ever felt that strange tension, that unspoken friction between the person you pretend to be and the person you silently know you are underneath it all? That lingering discomfort that doesn't announce itself dramatically, but rather creeps slowly into your heart, inch by inch, until the weight of your own silence becomes too heavy to bear. This is exactly how Elias felt. His story doesn't begin with losing everything or walking away from a spectacular crash. It begins in the quiet realization that he had lost himself in the noise of being everything to everyone. Elias had created a life meticulously constructed to impress, to comfort, and to conform. His days were filled with achievements, acknowledgements, polite nods, and carefully managed conversations. Yet when the applause faded, when the expectations quieted, and the world paused just long enough for him to catch his breath, Elias found himself not comforted by his achievements, but confronted by the haunting emptiness that now lived where his own voice once was. It happened slowly at first, in ways that were easy to overlook. He laughed at jokes that weren't funny. He nodded in agreement to opinions he no longer held, and he apologized simply for existing, too vividly, too deeply, too honestly. Each small compromise felt harmless on its own, but together they built into a silent betrayal that pressed gently, insistently, like a violin string being pulled tighter and tighter. Not yet broken, but dangerously close. Because this is the truth we rarely speak about. Most of us don't dramatically shatter. We quietly fade. We vanish one small, gentle compromise at a time, until one day we find ourselves wondering why we no longer recognize our own reflection, until one morning, we wake up as experts in disappearing. Yet something sacred, almost mystical, happens in the very moment you finally notice your own absence, not with rage, not with bitter resentment, but with a soft, trembling insistence. Your soul whispers clearly and decisively, "Enough." Have you ever stood at this silent edge? Have you ever felt that unbearable yet beautiful tension, where the cost of pretending becomes heavier than the fear of being truly seen, where the illusion of acceptance feels more suffocating than freeing, where even your own name feels foreign because you haven't spoken it truthfully for far too long? Elias didn't immediately alter his entire life. He didn't escape to distant mountains or abandon his responsibilities overnight. Instead, he did something far more courageous and infinitely more terrifying. He sat down in silence and allowed himself, for the first time in years, to truly listen. In that stillness, beneath layers of expectation and performance, beneath the noise of who he was supposed to be, a simple yet profound question emerged, shaking him softly yet powerfully. Whose life am I really living? That single question unraveled the tightly woven fabric of his carefully constructed identity. Because once you truly stop performing and begin deeply listening, not merely with your ears but with your entire being, something ancient, sacred, and long forgotten starts to wake up. Something within you begins to remember. Not the thrill of achievement, nor the pursuit of approval, but the gentle ache of authenticity, the quiet longing for a life that feels real. Slowly, clearly, Elias saw how much of his life had been shaped by survival rather than truth, how often he shrunk himself, softened his voice, tempered his emotions, not out of humility, but from fear of rejection or abandonment. He understood now that peace built on suppression isn't peace at all. It's a slow and quiet self-destruction. We've all been taught that silence is strength, compliance is kindness, and disappearing is grace. But what if your silence isn't humility at all? What if it's hiding? What if the authentic you is louder, bolder, and more beautifully complex than anyone ever allowed you to show. Ask yourself gently yet honestly now, what parts of yourself have you silenced just to belong? Where have you traded your truth for a fragile sense of approval? And what would it truly feel like, not to fight, not to shout, but simply to stop shrinking yourself? This is not about assigning blame, nor is it about seeking validation from the outside. This is about a sacred return to your own truth, a return to the place within you that was never lost, never desperate, never willing to sacrifice itself in exchange for conditional love. Because true clarity doesn't strike like lightning. It unfolds gently, quietly, like a memory being lovingly restored. And it begins the very moment you finally stop responding to the noise around you and start honoring the quiet voice within. That voice has always had a name. It is yours, and it has been patiently waiting all this time to finally be spoken aloud. There is a quiet betrayal we seldom acknowledge, not the loud kind marked by arguments or shattered trust, but one that quietly seeps through every moment you chose silence when your soul demanded to speak. It's subtle and slow, like water wearing down stone over years, leaving marks that no one sees, bruises no one else can feel. And the hardest part is realizing the one responsible is the person you face in the mirror every morning. There's a strange kind of tension that emerges when you begin to outgrow the version of yourself everyone else expects. It's like wearing clothes that once felt comfortable, but now constrain you, restricting your breath and movement in ways you never noticed before. At first, you smile through it, trying not to notice how each moment spent pretending feels heavier than the last. You convince yourself you're being overly sensitive, too emotional, too complicated. So you fold yourself back into the familiar shape others find acceptable, even if it means losing yourself a little more each day. But making yourself smaller isn't love, it's survival. Think of Anna, the one everyone turned to when they needed calm or comfort. Anna had a way of holding space, quietly absorbing storms that weren't hers, offering peace she rarely received in return. Her presence was a soft sanctuary, a place others visited when life became too loud. But no one ever asked what Anna herself needed, not really, until one day something broke within her, not violently, not loudly, but gently and undeniably. She found herself in a familiar room, surrounded by familiar faces, and for the first time, her truth refused to stay hidden behind the silence she had perfected. With a trembling voice and burning eyes, she spoke words that had been trapped inside her heart for years. "I'm not okay." The room didn't respond with comfort or concern. Instead, it became heavy with discomfort. Not because they were finally listening, but because they had never known what to do with her honesty. You see, when people build their comfort around your silence, the moment you speak clearly feels like rebellion. Have you felt that? Have you noticed how certain spaces welcome you only when your truth stays quiet, only when your heart remains hidden, only when your words are carefully softened? They're not intentionally cruel. They've just grown comfortable loving the version of you that never challenges the delicate balance they've created. But that comfort comes at the cost of your own wholeness. And maybe this is the hardest truth you'll face. Some people don't truly love you. They love what your silence allows them to believe about themselves. They love your presence only when it doesn't disturb their peace. They appreciate your softness, but only when it doesn't illuminate their rough edges. And if you're honest, deeply, vulnerably honest, you'll recognize all the moments you've chosen quiet compliance not because it felt right, but because your truth wasn't welcome. Yet something sacred happens when you finally begin to speak, not loudly, not angrily, but genuinely. You feel a shift deep within your bones. It's the subtle ache of recognition, the quiet realization that the real you, beneath layers of silence and compliance, is finally ready to be heard. This isn't about defiance. It's about remembrance, a remembrance of the you who once laughed without caution, spoke without hesitation, loved without apology. A version of yourself who refused to diminish simply to be accepted. Ask yourself this, slowly, without judgment. Who benefits most from your silence? Who feels discomfort when you finally speak your truth? And if you're only welcome when your voice remains quiet, are you truly welcome at all? This moment is not about anger. It's not about blame or confrontation. It is about returning to the version of yourself who never agreed to hide, who never needed permission to exist fully. You don't need to convince anyone. You don't need to shout or justify. You only need to remember your voice was never a threat, your truth was never a burden, and your authentic self is never something you owe an apology for. You were not placed here to be the quiet resting place for others who haven't learned to handle their own storms. Your purpose was never to vanish softly enough to make others comfortable in their discomfort. You are here not to be manageable or digestible or politely convenient. You are here to be real. And perhaps the most courageous act you can ever perform is to look at yourself clearly, lovingly, and say the words you've waited years to hear. I am no longer willing to disappear. And that single declaration, quiet yet profoundly brave, changes everything. There comes a quiet moment, not sudden like a storm, but gentle like the fading warmth of a sunset, when you finally begin to feel beneath your skin that the life you've been carefully molding yourself into no longer fits. It's not dramatic, it's the kind of awareness that slips in softly, weaving through the smallest spaces of your days, making itself known in the subtle heaviness of your chest, the forced gentleness in your voice, the careful restraint in your laughter. At first you think it's just tiredness, the kind of exhaustion a long weekend might soothe, but deep down, you know it's something far more persistent. It's the weariness that comes from spending your life translating your heart into a language others find easier to handle. You notice it each time you hesitate before speaking your truth, each time you soften your edges to avoid conflict, each time you surrender your authenticity to keep an uneasy peace. And maybe you've convinced yourself there's nobility in enduring it all. Perhaps you've even labeled your silence as grace, your shrinking as humility. But eventually, something inside starts to shift, not loudly, not angrily, but softly, insistently, like water slowly reshaping stone. Then, quietly, unmistakably, you just know. You know that if you continue choosing their comfort over your truth, you will slowly fade until there's nothing left of who you truly are. You know that if you remain where your authenticity feels like rebellion, you'll soon forget the sound of your own voice, and you realize that the room you're in no longer holds space for your growth. It only knows how to keep you small. This knowing doesn't come with triumph, it comes with grief. It feels like mourning every version of yourself that stayed too long, hoped too hard, and gave too generously, just to be loved in return. You don't walk away with rage or resentment. You walk away quietly, your heart heavy, your breath shallow, your soul aching, because leaving isn't about escaping. It's about finally acknowledging that no amount of shrinking will make you fit into a space you've outgrown. But here's the truth that's rarely spoken clearly. Leaving isn't always about physical departure. Sometimes leaving means finding your voice within the very space that demanded your silence. Sometimes it's as subtle as choosing honesty where you once chose compliance. Sometimes the bravest act isn't stepping out of the room. It's deciding, once and for all, to stop negotiating for acceptance at the cost of your true self. And in those moments, you begin asking the questions you once avoided, not because they were unclear, but because the answers carried too much pain. Why do I keep returning to places that only accept me when I'm smaller? Why do I mistake sacrificing my voice for loyalty? Why do I still believe they'll hear me if I just speak softly enough? Because the deeper truth, the one you've tried to ignore, is that some people only understand you through your pain. Some spaces will only hold you if your fullness remains outside their doors. Some relationships will only survive as long as you silence your truth to maintain their comfort. And yes, you will feel the pull of familiarity calling you back, urging you to shrink again, to apologize again, to label your truth as selfishness rather than self-respect. But the real compassion, the kind that finally sets you free, is the one you begin to offer yourself. It's compassion for the years you spent bending quietly under burdens you were never meant to carry. It's compassion for the voice within you, now aching to finally speak aloud. It's compassion for the light in you, tired of flickering just so others won't be disturbed by their own shadows. And slowly, bravely, you start letting go, not with bitterness, not with resentment, but with a quiet, sacred understanding that not every place is meant to keep you. Not every love story needs a rewritten ending. Some chapters are meant to close, simply so that you can begin again. And yes, the space you step into next might feel silent at first, not because you've done something wrong, but because truth often begins quietly, without applause or immediate reward. Healing rarely announces itself loudly. It comes in the gentle moments after you stop pretending, after you stop running, after you stop negotiating away your truth, and in that quiet stillness, for the first time in what feels like forever, you will hear something clear and unmistakable, your own breath, your own heartbeat, your own knowing. And finally, you realize it has always been enough. There comes a sacred point along every path, not marked by milestones or applause, but by a quiet moment of pause. It's not the kind of pause you anticipate, nor one you can plan for. Instead, it gently yet firmly halts your steps, urging you not forward, but inward. It doesn't ask for your strength or speed, your certainty or control. It asks simply for your presence, your honesty, your willingness to finally confront the truths you've delicately avoided, not because you couldn't see them, but because acknowledging them felt too raw, too tender, too sacred while you were still performing. This is that moment. Here, time itself seems to slow, and the chaos that once surrounded you gently fades away. Here, all the questions you've tried to outrun softly come closer, sit quietly beside you, and whisper in the gentlest of voices, "Now, are you ready to talk?" Perhaps you're weary now, tired in ways sleep alone can't soothe. You're tired of holding it all together, tired of performing strength that no one notices, exhausted from editing your laughter, your tears, your voice, just to fit neatly into spaces that were never designed to embrace someone as deeply, fiercely, beautifully human as you. Yet this chapter isn't about doing. It's about becoming. It's about shedding every layer you once wore for acceptance, and finally remembering the essence of who you truly are beneath all that performance. Because healing doesn't always appear as forward motion. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the tender stillness of your heart. Sometimes it's not about chasing another transformation or breakthrough, but simply sitting beside your younger self in the dark and softly whispering, "You no longer have to prove your worth." Sometimes healing means making the quiet, yet revolutionary decision never again to betray yourself for the comfort of others. You begin to notice this shift slowly in quiet gestures, in how you pause before responding, how you no longer rush to ease others' discomfort at your own expense, in the newfound gentleness with which you hold yourself. You stop trying to justify your growth to those determined to misunderstand. You no longer wait for permission to be whole, finally understanding you were never seeking mere love. You longed to be loved without conditions, and clarity arrives quietly yet unmistakably. Not everyone can walk this new path with you. Not every relationship survives your awakening. Not every connection can bear the weight of your full truth. Yet this realization isn't tragedy, it's liberation. It's the gentle sorting of what aligns with your deepest truth and what no longer does. And still, in this quiet liberation, you grieve. You grieve not only the places or people you're stepping away from, but the parts of you that tried so desperately to hold it all together. You grieve the moments you smiled through the pain, stayed when staying broke you, hoped fiercely someone else would change so you wouldn't have to. You mourn the safety you found in silence and the illusion of peace you bought with pieces of yourself. Yet, from within that quiet grief, something remarkable begins to bloom. It is subtle, yet unstoppable, like wildflowers pushing softly, persistently through cracks in concrete. It's a gentle, courageous knowing that doesn't seek validation or applause. Something that no longer needs external permission to know its worth. A quiet strength, an unwavering certainty whispering to you in your most vulnerable moments. I am no longer available to abandon myself for anything or anyone. Maybe the road ahead isn't clear yet. Perhaps it feels uncertain, unfamiliar, filled with more questions than answers. Yet this time you are not stepping forward in silence. You are stepping forward in truth, and that changes everything. The world might never fully comprehend the depths of your journey. It may never applaud the moments you chose integrity over ease, authenticity over acceptance, your own soul over superficial peace. But you will know. You will hold the sacred memory of every tear shed, every silent struggle endured, every night you spent trying to be small enough, quiet enough, lovable enough. You will forever remember the exact moment your heart whispered, clearly and decisively, "No more." And when you look back, not with regret or bitterness, but with reverence, you'll clearly see the years you spent choosing others, and then the quiet, courageous moment you finally chose yourself. That moment is here. That moment is now. So allow yourself to arrive fully. Not as someone different, but as someone whole. Allow yourself the grace of breathing deeply, freely, without apology. Allow yourself to stand boldly in the beautiful, messy light of your own becoming, and do not look away. Because this is not the end. This is your beginning. The beginning of a life no longer founded on silence. The beginning of a self that will no longer be negotiated. The beginning of a love that will never again ask you to disappear, because you cannot heal in the place that broke you. You can only learn how to survive there, and now it is time to live. Welcome home.